I want to ask for some grace today, okay? Before we go any further, I just want you to give me some grace. This might be a little too touchy for some of you, and I apologize. But I'm going to ask a question that I've struggled with for a long time. Was the Good Samaritan really good, or would a better name for the Good Samaritan be the Lucky Samaritan? Don't shoot me yet, all right? I don't know, but this is a question that I started struggling with because, as many of you guys know, the Good Samaritan, a parable that Jesus told to the believers, whenever they asked, they said, oh my goodness, what should we be doing? How should we be kind to others? And Jesus said, be kind to your neighbor. And they said, they wanted to justify themselves, and they said, well, who's my neighbor? And then Jesus told this story of the Good Samaritan that we're going to read. And Jesus told this to people who are way smarter than I'll ever be. But here's what Jesus said in Luke chapter 10. A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he was attacked by robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed on the other side. So too, a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came to where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii and gave it to the innkeeper. Look after him, he said, and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense you might have. This week, we're in our second week of a series, Make Your Mark, where last week we talked about how we could choose the better story and leave a legacy, leave a mark for those who come behind us, for our loved ones and our friends. And as we talked about that, this next message was talking about leaving a mark. It begs the question, what do we do next? If we decide that we want to leave our mark, what do we do next? There's something that I want you to know if you're watching online today. Welcome. We're glad that you're here. If you're in this room, there's something I want you to know. I think there's something that Scripture shouts to us all throughout the Bible that we need to know today, and here's what it is. Catch this. Being a servant is how we become like Christ. Being a servant is how we become like Christ. We are most like Christ when we are serving. Now, we've all heard about the Good Samaritan. Even people who don't go to church is kind of heard this idea of the Good Samaritan, of this kind gentleman who took pity on somebody and showed kindness whenever he didn't need to or he didn't deserve it, right? It's a story we tell to our kids, and it's a story we tell to our friends of how to be kind and nice to somebody who's different, and even when they don't deserve it. You go out of your way to show kindness, to do acts of service to somebody who has a need. And this is why this question has been rolling around in my mind. I had it as a young kid, but it was one of those questions that I never really felt like I could ask. Y'all ever have those? Like, I shouldn't ask this question. I mean, this is a story Jesus told as a parable, but would a better name for the Good Samaritan be the Lucky Samaritan? It's a question that I'm going to deal with here today because it's something that was rolling around in my mind. And if you're here at New Start, sometimes we deal with those questions. The questions that maybe we shouldn't ask, but we think, or the questions that we think other people will judge us for asking. And we want to be able to deal with those. So what if you go look for this in Scripture, you're not going to find it. This is just where my mind goes because I heard the story of the Good Samaritan and I recognized a version of it, and it was a version of me. But I'm going to tell it from his point of view. What if the Good Samaritan wasn't really good, he was just lucky? He was going to church one day, in the church that his family grew up in the place where his family had for generations helped build that place. He was a hardworking guy. He was fun to be around, but he never really got involved in anything. He never really did a whole lot. There was always a reason not to get involved. There was always a reason not to serve. And the pastor would be asking, hey, we've got a church work day coming up. You guys can get involved. Or we're going to be feeding the homeless over here. And whether it was kids' soccer practice or dad's illness that came up, and man, he just never got that chance to do the next thing. He always wanted to. There was always something there that he wanted to do. But he just never really took that leap and did it. And so as he went to church this one Sunday, sat in the back pew, the preacher, the teacher of that time, the rabbi challenged him, I want you to become a servant and to start doing good. And he left that day, bugged out real quick, and said, okay, I've got to go. I've got something going on. And he left, and he started walking home. And man, that you guys have that feeling sometimes that just something's gnawing at you. You know, that feeling in the pit of your stomach to where you just couldn't shake it. And so as he's walking home, he's looking ahead and kind of wrestling with himself. I want to be able to engage. I want to be able to do something. And as he looks up, he sees somebody kind of just walking the same path, and he kind of just takes a little detour, goes out and around and keeps going. And he thought that was kind of strange. Didn't think much of it. And a little bit later, there was another guy in front of him and got to that same spot and went around. And as he thought it was strange, he finally approaches that area, and he sees why those other two guys left. And there was a man half dead laying in a ditch. And that feeling of what the pastor was talking about kind of showed up right in his stomach. And he's like, here's my chance. And so he scoops up the guy, and he bandages his wounds. He sees the need right in front of him, and he performs an act of service for this gentleman. And it's the Good Samaritan. And not only does he do it, he scoops him up, he pours on the oil and the wine, and he puts him on his camel and takes him to the inn and says, listen, this guy needs something. And whatever he needs, I'll take care of. And he genuinely gives from the bottom of his heart for this need that's right in front of him. He feels good about this act. He leaves. He walks away, and he feels good. That feeling is gone for a moment. And he's excited about it because he was the Good Samaritan who served somebody. I recognize this story because it's something that I enjoy. It's something that personally I deal with, and I'm like, oh man, I like it. It's a great story. But what would have happened if that story goes on and the Good Samaritan then hears Jesus? He hears about his story that he's done telling everybody else. He's telling these religious leaders, and the story spreads like wildfire. And he's like, that was me. Just imagine that for a second. Imagine you did something in the moment, and then Jesus starts talking about it, and everybody knows. I know what I would do. I'd be like, remember that story that Jesus told about that guy who did that great thing with that other thing and those people in that time? Yeah, that was me. That was me. I'm the Good Samaritan. I made T-shirts. Right? I mean, imagine the feeling that guy had. I want to tell you another story. I want to tell you another story about a young seamstress from a small town who hears about this guy, this Savior of the world, who came and died just for her. She was also a good girl, raised in a good home, did her job, did everything she could for people. But there was just still something missing. But when she heard about this Jesus who died for her sins, she immediately turned from her selfish ways and gave her life to him. Not only gave her life to him, but started acting it out. She went to her church and she went to her local synagogue, and she said, hey, what is something that I can do? What is a way that I can give back? What is a way that I can do good? And the leaders of the church kind of gathered around. They said, well, you're a seamstress, and there's a need right here in your own city, in your own town, of these poor people who do not have clothes. They don't have anything to wear. And so as a seamstress, maybe one of the things that you can do is use your gift, use your talent, use your ability, and start blessing the poor. And so she does. She starts making clothes for the poor. But instead of just making clothes for the poor, she starts hanging out with them. She starts dedicating her time that she's spending with them. She starts to realize who they are and know them by name. And we're going to pick up that story in Acts chapter 9, and here's what it says. Acts chapter 9, verses 36. In Joppa, there was a disciple named Tabitha. In Greek, her name is Dorcas, and we're going to call her Dorcas for the rest of today. She was always doing good and helping the poor. But about that time, she became sick and died, and her body was washed and placed in an upstairs room. Lydda was near Joppa, so when the disciples heard that Peter was in Lydda, they sent 2 men to him and urged him, "Please come at once," they said. Peter went to them, and when he arrived, he was taken upstairs to the room. All the widows stood around him crying and showing him the robes and other clothes that Dorcas had made while he was still with them. You see, Peter shows up and he has this moment. He has this moment where he has heard about this disciple. He has heard about this follower of Jesus. And not only has he heard about her, he shows up to see what's going on. And all around the room, there were people showing him the things that she had done. Not just the acts of service, not just the sweater. They weren't just holding up the sweater or the coat saying, "Look, where am I going to get my sweaters and coats now? This lady's died." They were holding it up and weeping. Because the sweater that they used to cover themselves whenever they needed it the most was a symbol of the warmth that they felt when they were with her, because she had dedicated her life to serving the poor and the widows. Commentaries talk about how Dorcas wasn't just a hearer of the word, she was a doer of the word. It was up to her. She took it upon herself to take that moment, to take that mantle, go beyond just the act of serving, and to genuinely become a servant. It distinguishes them there. It says 2 things that she was known for. She was known for helping the poor, meeting their needs, but she was also known for doing good. She was actively serving a group of people. She knew their names. She knew their history. She knew why they were there. She knew what life had thrown their way. And her life impacted them in more ways than just the superficial, more than just the things that she did. Her life impacted people relationally because she knew who she was serving. She knew who she was a servant to. She was helping the poor. She was meeting their needs. So was the Good Samaritan. Like, these 2 stories do have a lot in common. They were both meeting the needs, but where the story of the Good Samaritan stops is in the act of becoming a servant. Her acts of serving went beyond the circumstance that she was in, and seeing a need and filling a need, that she began to invest in people's lives. While she invested in them, she began to see more than the physical needs that these poor widows had. She began to see the scars of brokenness, abuse, the scars of hopelessness and suffering that her new friends had faced throughout their difficult lives. They were looking for their physical needs to be met, no doubt about it. But in the process of meeting their physical needs, Dorcas became a servant to those people, giving of herself, making time out of her daily schedule to be able to attend not only to their physical needs, but to their emotional and spiritual wounds that plagued a certain class of people within the city. This idea of meeting people where they are and being involved with them is different. This idea of circumstantial serving is one that we're all familiar with. I was driving down the road one day, and I was heading home. And man, I felt a lot like I just identified the Good Samaritan as. It was a day a lot like this week, springtime, finally could roll the windows down a little bit, cruising down I-70, and I see something. I get off on an exit, and I see a gentleman holding a sign very similar to this. It was my home exit, so I was used to it. And this guy was out of place. I'd never seen him there before. As I pulled up closer and closer, you're doing the slow down to get off the exit. The light is red, and I immediately start looking. I become convicted, and I feel, oh, man, I need to do something for this guy. So I start looking for some change or some $5 bills or, $50 bills, depending on how generous you think I am. And I start doing that, and I'm like, oh, man, I can't find anything. And I was going to stop and try to pull my wallet out, and I looked in my rearview mirror, and a car started coming up behind me, and I kind of got in that angst moment. Y'all ever been there? That moment of, whoa, what do I do? And right about where I could make that decision, the light turned green. The light turned green, and I had a choice to make. I felt like I needed to stop and contribute. I felt like I needed to stop and serve this gentleman right here. But what I did was my right foot just hit the gas, and I just cruised right on through that light. Oh, man, that sat with me. All the way home, I was kind of kicking myself, and I had all the excuses in the world not to stop and help. But the moment where that my circumstance had offered an opportunity for me to serve somebody, to do an act of service for somebody by seeing a sign, by feeling checked, kind of ate me up. I went back the next 3, 4, 5 weeks. I had it ready, man. I had my $5 bill like up in my visor, and I was gonna stop, and I was gonna bless this person, and I was gonna do something good. But I never saw him again. And that still eats me to this day. Like, man, I could have done something. But I realized something, that the reason that it really bothered me wasn't because I just didn't do the act of service, but a lot of times in that moment in my life, it was the only act of service I was doing. There wasn't anybody that I was being a servant to. There wasn't anybody that I was planning to serve. It was all just coincidence. And I had zero problem with stopping and pulling somebody out of a ditch or helping somebody with some homework that they needed. But the only act of serving that I was doing was an act of serving. It was circumstantial. See, today we're going to be talking about making our mark. And when we make our mark, when we become servants, making our mark is not on other people. You see, serving changes others. The Good Samaritan, he changed that man's situation. Everything, when he stopped and he stopped everything that he was doing, he put that guy on his donkey, he took him, he saved his life. Oh my goodness. It's that moment where something completely changes for somebody else. See, serving changes others, but becoming a servant or being a servant changes me. There's something different that happens whenever we look at ourselves as helping from a higher place than somebody else. We're reaching down and helping somebody else up. And it becomes very easy for us to feel good about who we are when we are just serving others. We see a need and we meet a need. That's not wrong. It's a good thing to do. I don't want you to leave here thinking that the Good Samaritan wasn't actually a Good Samaritan. He was. We need those kinds of things where we can see a visible need and help that visible need. But those visible needs change others, but becoming a servant with a servant's heart changes you. It changes me. Serving helps me feel better. Becoming a servant changes who I am. One talks about the decision that you made in a circumstance in a moment, and the other determines a lifestyle. We oftentimes react to a situation or serve from that position of power. But Galatians tells us this: let us not grow weary of doing good. What Dorcas was doing is she was helping the poor, but she was also doing good. We have a slogan here at New Start, doing good in Delaware County. And it's not just seeing a need and stopping one time and helping somebody out with their gas. It's doing good. It's becoming relationally involved with people to where you are doing good. Because I don't know about you, but I don't really become weary of stopping and pulling people out of ditches that have slid off the road in the snow. I don't really become weary of, if a friend calls and said, hey, I'm needing a little help, and you just run over. I don't become weary of dropping off groceries once a year to a friend or letting them borrow a cup of sugar. Does anyone still do that? Hey, neighbor, you got a cup of sugar? No? Okay. Those things aren't the things that make me weary. The things that make me weary are the things that I'm doing day in and day out, where I'm putting in the effort but oftentimes not seeing the immediate return. Which leads us to our second point, and it's that serving costs me something. Serving costs me something. The Good Samaritan stopped. It cost him his time. It cost him his oils. It cost him his wine. It cost him some denarii. It cost him some money because he was serving. He was seeing a need and filling that need. But being a servant, that costs me everything. Being a servant costs me everything. I'm changing my life around. I'm changing my calendar around. I'm stopping the things that I'm doing, and I'm not letting circumstances just take over and say, well, when the circumstance presents itself, man, that's when I can serve well. We love serving well like that. We love seeing the immediate change on somebody's face when we're kind to them or when we bless them with anything. You've had somebody pay for your drink order at Starbucks? Oh, my goodness. Well, yes, I'm just going to go ahead and pay back. And then you get the $43 bill. Yeah. Been there. You're like, well, I can't break the chain now. It's been going since 6:30 a.m. Dale Benson, he's a pastor at Grove City Church of the Nazarene. They say it this way at their church, and I love this. What is something that you love that you're willing to give up for something you love even more? What is something you love that you're willing to give up for someone you love even more? That's where that servant, becoming a servant, changes. It's no longer about just doing the good thing, doing the thing that is visible that you can see. It's about putting in the time and the effort to be a servant over the long haul, to get to know somebody relationally. And we know this because Dorcas knew people. Peter shows up, and in this room, there's just filled with people that are showing him her acts of kindness. Who's in your room? Who are the people that you are investing in? The people that you are relationally involved with? Not just seeing a need, but you've been there before the need arises, and you'll be there long after the need is gone. Where is somebody that is going to be in your room when they need you, when the relationship is lost? And they're not going to be crying because, oh my goodness, my neighbor always helped me out when I needed him, and how am I going to get helped out now? No. Dorcas began to relationally involve herself with these people. And while they were showing her the coats, while they were showing Peter the things that she had done, the needs, the physical needs that she had met, they were reminiscing about the relationships that they had. Who are the people that are going to gather in our room? It's not just about showing up on a mission trip. Man, I went on a mission trip and I did some good work, and I've got the pictures on Facebook to prove it. That was a good time. Hit me right in the feels. Oh, I dropped off some groceries at my neighbor's house. I helped out my family. I even gave my kid's teacher, a $15 Starbucks gift card, not just the $5 ones. The things that we do sometimes that we often point back to. And as I was going through this, I recognized something. Today, how are we going to make our mark? We make our mark. We make our mark by being a servant. And that marks us for the gospel. That marks us as being a servant for him. When we change from serving others to becoming a servant, 365 days ago, Desiree, Greg, and myself, we met at a restaurant. We were discussing this thing called COVID. It was new. And everyone else was canceling services. And that day, 365 days ago, 1 year ago today, we decided to cancel in-person gatherings. Oh my goodness. Our world's changed a lot since then, hasn't it? It doesn't seem like that long ago, but it seems like it's been forever. We had a great number of people engaged in acts of service and in serving, being servants to other people. Many of you sitting here, many of you watching online, man, you were engaged in what was happening. You had skin in the game. You were relationally involved with people in your life groups, in your ministry areas within the church, outside of the church, in your community organizations, in your neighborhoods. You were engaged relationally. You had skin in the game. And when everything began to stop, when everything came to a halt, oh my goodness, time flew by like that, and the entire world changed. And a lot of times what we ended up doing is we ended up serving people without any plan as to being a servant. Without any plan or care or worry about who we're being relationally involved with. We were all relationally involved with our family because we couldn't go anywhere, right? And that became an option, and that became something that a lot of people worked out. But as we have slowly, over this past 365 days, began to open up and began to do more things, I've had conversations with many of you saying, man, I miss this. I miss being a servant. And if you're not careful, what we end up doing is the exact same thing that the lucky Samaritan did. What I end up doing is the exact same thing as the lucky Samaritan did, is start talking about the things I used to do without being actively engaged with people, without being relationally engaged with people. This is why it's so important for us as a church. We don't want to be known as a church. This is why everything that we've done over the past year and a half, over the past 18 months, has been for this, because we don't want to be known for a church that has an awesome children's pastor. We don't want to be known as a church where we can say, hey, come on over, because we have one person here who's gonna preach to your kids, who's gonna love on your kids, who's gonna engage with your kids, who's gonna preach the gospel to them and disciple them and engage them. No. We want to be a church that has everybody who's doing that, where we care and we love and we disciple and we have skin in the game. We don't want to be known as someone who has a pastor who does that. We want to be known as a people who do that. We want to gather together with like-minded people, exactly like Dorcas, who are willing to sacrifice their wants, who are willing to sacrifice something that they love for someone they love even more. Because that's what Christ calls us to, is to become a servant. To become a servant, to change our mindset, because when we leave our mark, when we become a servant, we leave our mark on us, not on everybody else. A servant might never see the fruits of their labor, but they know it's going to happen. They believe it's going to happen with all their heart, with all their mind, that it's going to happen. See, being a servant isn't about the other, it's about you. It's a heart change. It's a decision that we get to make. The mark we make in our serving isn't for the others, it's about us. And today, I'm going to challenge you to leave that mark with yourself. Change that mindset. If you've been relying on circumstances to serve, hey, we need people for the Easter egg hunt. Well, I can do that. Who are the people that you're relationally involved with as well? Because we need both. Scripture talks about how they will know that we are Christians by our love. And I want to encourage us as we walk out of these doors today to choose to be a servant, because that's when we are most like Christ.